Hey, right, we're going to get straight on with the Pillion report on the Royal Enfield Classic 650 today. I know that's not the usual order that I do these reviews in, but, you know, a mixture of the bank holiday, the weather over the bank holiday weekend, and Paula's availability have meant that I've had to slot this in first. So, just to make this clear, this is not the general review of the motorcycle, it's just the review of the motorcycle pertaining to pillion work and touring with a pillion. Now, I did get a brief sort of 1.5 hour ride on the bike on Thursday afternoon, and then I managed to spend the afternoon on it on my own on Friday, so I was starting to get a general idea of what the bike is like. But then the weather broke on Saturday. We've had sort of rain, cold weather Saturday, Sunday. Monday was the first day we had a chance to sort of get out. Paula was off, so I thought it would be a good idea to just get on with the pillion work. And we did about 100 miles during the course of the day. Now, I say about 100 miles. For some unknown reason, the odometer and the trip meters on the bike are recording in kilometres rather than miles. And I'm not entirely sure how to switch it across, so I thought I'd best just leave it alone so I don't mess anything up. But I've worked out that it was roughly 100 miles carrying a pillion, so, you know, I'm quite satisfied that I've got a good sort of accurate idea of what the bike is like. When I'm touring, I prefer not to travel much more than sort of 100, 120 miles a day because, you know, I want to enjoy the experience. I don't want to turn it into a battle for endurance, you know, I just want to enjoy the ride, so I'm quite confident of the conclusions that I've come to. If you remember on my walk around video that I published last Friday, the C-spanner for adjusting the rear suspension was missing. I mean, I think I know how this happens. These bikes are purposely run in by some dedicated riders employed by Royal Enfield before they're released to the press, which I think is a really nice touch. It's an important thing to do because it means that the bike, you know, the engine is nicely loosened up and everything's working optimally. One of the reasons that I had to wait for this bike was because because of the amount of bikes they've got. It was awaiting the mileage to be put on it before it could be released to me. And if those riders are anything like me, when it comes to setting your suspension up, it's always better to carry the C-spanner in your pocket rather than having to root around in the toolkit every time you need to make some adjustment to get it how you prefer it. Because, you know, they're covering a few hundred miles on these bikes, they need to be comfortable. And I suspect that C-spanner is still in somebody's pocket because I know they have several riders that take the different bikes out. The bike would have been running by just one rider. And if I'm anything to go by, I put my big coat on because it was quite cold while I was filming this. And I already had 3 C-spanners in my pocket. So I managed to adjust the suspension sufficiently. I adjusted it to position 3. There are a total of 5 adjustment points on these rear shocks. I set it to the middle, but obviously where you adjust it to is going to differ according to the weight of the rider and pillion rider. I think for lighter weight couples, position 2 will probably be sufficient. Now, pillion, I keep referring to Paula as the pillion. I know the pillion is a pad that is on the, you know, behind the rider's seat on a bike, and technically speaking, a pillion rider is not a pillion, but everybody knows what I mean, so that's the expression that I use rather than saying passenger or pillion rider. It is just for ease of talking while I'm making these videos, so there's no need to correct me in the comments and, you know, give me a long drawn out spiel explaining that a pillion is actually the little pad behind the rider's seat. I know that, but everybody knows what I mean when I say pillion. Now, the first time I rode this bike, and I did comment on this in the walk around, I didn't find the seat particularly comfortable. 30 miles in, I was feeling quite numb. The padding on the seat is quite soft and it doesn't give a lot of support. Now, the other thing is when I got off the bike, my tailbone It hurt for about, I don't know, 10-20 minutes. So straight off the bat, I wasn't very impressed with the seat, and I should point out that, you know, I do ride regularly. I am reasonably saddle hardened, so that, you know, it did surprise me that the seat felt pretty crap, to be quite honest. Now, the other thing that I think came into play with this is the rear suspension. I think they've got the spring-in about right, but the damping is quite hard. Now, if I remember correctly, the rear suspension on the Super Meteor 650 and I think the Shotgun 650 was it was like there was almost no suspension at all. It was really hard suspension on the back end on both of those bikes. This is nowhere near as bad as that. Comfort and handling wise, this suspension for a solo rider is a huge improvement over those two previous models. But I think some people might struggle to get along with the standard seat. We're all different at the end of the day, so don't take that as gospel. It's a suck it and see job. Now, I did have a look after my first ride just to see if the touring seats were available for this bike. They're not at the moment. Normally, Royal Enfield have a full range of accessories for new models at release, but for some reason with the Classic 650 that doesn't seem to be the case. But I've spoken to a few people, and, you know, touring options are going to be available, including, I think, backrests for the Pillion. Now, don't just write off the suspension and the seat straight away, because things were very different once I had a Pillion on board. That stiff damping compensates really nicely for the extra weight when you're carrying a Pillion. You know, suspension on bikes, it's a difficult one to get right for any manufacturer, really. There's always a compromise. It's a balancing act. They've made it as comfortable as they can for a solo rider, but the real comfort comes in when you're carrying a Pillion. That extra weight sort of balances really well with the slightly stiff damping. So that 100-mile day that we did, to be quite honest, I was perfectly comfortable all day. I didn't have any further problems with the seat. So just bear that in mind. Now, Royal Enfield's touring seats with their sort of dual density foam and the 3D netting are a worthwhile upgrade. It's a shame that the bike doesn't come with them. I know they should do, really, in my mind, but if you do buy a Classic 650 or you already own one and you're not getting along very well with the seat, I think the upgrade to the touring seat will sort this issue out. It's down to the damping on the rear shocks. Now, it did strike me while I was riding this bike with Paula on the back, this is an exemplary long-distance two-up tourer. It just loves carrying that extra weight. Now, that 19-inch wheel up front doesn't compromise handling one little bit. I've had a few people sort of making fun of various manufacturers' choices to put a 19-inch wheel on the front. A 19-inch wheel is a perfect combination with an 18 on the back. Smaller diameter front wheels didn't come along until the 1980s as we ran into the sports bike era. This isn't a sports bike, it's a commuter tourer, and the setup that Royal Enfield have chosen here is absolutely spot on. Steering isn't quick, but then again, you don't want quick steering on a bike like this. What you want is accurate, deliberate steering, and that's exactly what you get with the Classic 650. Predictable, comfortable and safe. The bike never gave me any cause for concern at any point during that 100 miles with Paula on the back. It's just a point and square sort of setup. You know, it does exactly what you want it to do. The suspension handles the extra weight impeccably. The bike stays level and stable. It's a perfect two-up tourer. Now, as much as I've had some reservations about the way that Royal Enfield have styled this bike, there are just styling niggles, you know, they're not major things. And I couldn't help thinking on Monday while we were riding around, this 650 engine was just built for this particular model. It seems more suited to this bike than any of the other Royal Enfield 650s that I've ridden that have this engine in them. Somehow this is the perfect combination. As a two-up tourer, it's almost perfection. You've got that deep guttural growl from the engine. There isn't loads of power, but there's more than enough power for overtaking, providing you plan things properly, etc. Somehow the whole package just feels so right in comparison with their other 650s. In fact, I remember as I was riding along this section of road here, when I was able to sort of open it up a little bit, I thought to myself, my God, Royal Enfield should have led with this bike. They should have just built this model 5 years ago instead of messing around with the rest of them. Now, I can't quite put my finger on what it is, but the engine does feel different on this bike compared to the other 650 twins that I've ridden from Royal Enfield, all of which have the same basic engine. I suspect it's something to do with the way that they've tuned it, but it just seems to be sort of more animalistic, not necessarily faster or more powerful, but more animalistic and characterful. The whole thing, with that extra large casket or nacelle on the instrument panel surrounding the headlamp, it just feels big and imposing. You get a really nice feeling while you're riding this bike, and that extra weight of the pillion on back, it just seems to love it. It just soaks it up. In a lot of ways, it's very similar to the 350 Classic in the way that it handles pillion work. And the 350 Classic, obviously, as I've discovered over the years, is a fantastic pillion carrier. It's sort of like a classic 350, but a classic 350 that's been on steroids and a very intensive gym workout. It is a heavier bike, I think altogether around about 50 kilograms heavier, but you certainly don't feel that when you're riding it, even with a pillion on the back. It doesn't really come into play much when you're in traffic, although you do notice it a little bit. But it is a really nicely balanced bike. Now, I know, going back to my Triumph Bonnevilles, Paula prefers to sort of swing a leg over the bike to get on, as a rider would. But the classic 650, like my old T120, is just a little bit tall for her to be able to do that comfortably, so she has to step up onto the left-hand pillion peg and sort of climb on board that way, which I know on the T120 used to make the bike quite unstable. It wanted to fall to the left, so she had to let me know that she was about to get on, so that I could brace myself to take the weight for that second or so while she's climbing on board. I barely noticed it on the Classic, which really surprised me. Whereas the T120 would always lurch to the left as she climbed on board, and I'd have to put quite a bit of effort into it to stabilise the bike and keep it upright. I barely felt it on the Classic, and I'm not quite sure how Royal Enfield have pulled it off, because I've not experienced it on any other bike that I can think of off the top of my head. But they've done a really good job there. It's just perfect for pillion work. Now, I did pay attention, obviously, because I was in the process of evaluating this bike for pillion work, but as far as I could tell, the engine barely notices the extra weight. And bearing in mind that we were only on position 3 on the preload on the rear suspension, there's plenty of sort of leeway there for luggage as well. Now, as I've said, there doesn't seem to be much in the way of accessories for touring available for this bike as yet, but I did have a word with Hitchcock's, and they are developing one of the sort of original Royal Enfield design pannier frames that I think are probably the best pannier frames in the world for this bike. The Shotgun and the Super Meteor version don't fit this bike because there are very slight differences in some of the clearances, but they are developing one, and it should be available before too long, which then gives you an enormous choice of different bags, including Hitchcock's own bags, if that's the direction you want to go on, to equip you for long distance travelling. Now, I'm not going to pretend that this bike is perfect. Before we get onto the Pillions viewpoint of what this bike is like, there's just one little sort of idiosyncrasy that I wanted to point out. The big front wheel, the heavy metal front mudguard, and of course that big extra large casket or nacelle that surrounds the headlamp assembly. It puts quite a bit of weight on the front end of the bike. Now, in stop-start traffic, the bike is reasonably stable, don't get me wrong, it handles perfectly well, no complaints, but you've got a lot of weight on the back end of the bike, so as you're accelerating from a start, obviously it makes the front end go a little bit light, as it does on any bike. And that weight becomes noticeable. It creates a sort of inertia for a few seconds as you're setting off. So if you're in a situation as you're setting off where you're just adjusting the direction of the bike slightly, the steering sort of, because that extra weight wants to continue, it wants to continue turning. Now, it's not an issue. It doesn't make the bike dangerous or unstable or anything like that. It's just something that I became aware of. You soon get used to it, and it's not like a very powerful force or anything. You're just aware that, as you're setting off, if you turn sharply to the left or the right to correct your position on the road as you're setting off, you do feel it wanting to continue turning a little bit. I see it more as an idiosyncrasy of that extra weight in front of the steering yoke rather than an issue. It's just something to be aware of. Now, the Pillion's perspective of this bike, because it's all very well the bike handling well and coping well and being good for the rider with a pillion on the back, but the Pillion's got to be comfortable and feel safe and secure as well. We've got the usual issues here that we seem to get with a lot of bikes. In Paula's opinion, the pillion pad is too narrow. It could do with being another inch or so wider. In fact, it is noticeably narrower than most motorcycle seats, including the classic 350. I think the reason the pillion pad is so narrow is because Royal Enfield have chosen to go for these side grab handles rather than a grab rail at the back, which Paula prefers. Now, I don't know whether Royal Enfield's touring seat is going to address any of these issues, but this is not ideal. Paula said that she found she could only hold on to one of the handles at a time. She couldn't get both arms down to hold on securely, and this meant that after a while she was experiencing quite a lot of discomfort and pain in her hand. Bearing in mind that because it's a narrow seat and those handles are not very wide apart, she was sort of putting pressure on her thumb all the time while she was riding, because those handles are not that wide apart. She was sort of partly sitting on her own hand for most of the time. Now, a rear grab rail would sort this issue out instantly and give you the facility of a wider seat. I'm not really sure why Royal Enfield have gone down this route, but it is a bit of a misstep in my opinion. Because let's face it, there's not many adult pillions, male or female, that are going to be so narrow they're going to be able to fit on that seat comfortably and be able to use those grab rails. It's just not going to work out for anybody. I think the solution here, because Paula said the seat actually, despite being narrow, was comfortable, but for long distance touring, again, she was going to need a proper pillion rail. Royal Enfield put a pillion rail on most of their bikes, including the classic 350. Why they've chosen to go down this route it is beyond me, but it does seriously inhibit the distances that a pillion is going to be able to travel on this bike. Paula said she would literally have to sort of get off the bike every 10 to 20 miles to get the feeling back in her hand again. She did try swapping. She tried everything she could to sort of afford herself some comfort with these grab handles on the side, but she said she just couldn't get on with them. And she was complaining that her hand hurt quite badly the following day. So, yeah, this needs addressing. Either buy an aftermarket grab rail and get rid of those handles, or you know, something needs to be done. There always seems to be some sort of issue with bikes nowadays, and they just don't accommodate the pillion properly. Now, just putting that issue to one side for a moment, she said, you know, without that issue, the seat was comfortable, the pillion foot pegs were in a good position, she liked that, and she also loved the suspension. She felt it was a very comfortable ride in general. It's just that issue with those silly grab handles. The other thing that she particularly liked is that the pillion pad is higher than the the rider's seat, so she could see over my shoulders easily, she could see the road ahead easily, and she could see how fast I was going. She does like to be able to see what's coming up rather than things coming as a shock, because, you know, I'm in a line of vision. It'll be interesting to see if Royal Enfield offers a solution to this, with the touring accessories when they are finally released, because it just spoils what is potentially a top-rate two-up long-distance tourer. Right, once again, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this and my other videos, and in doing so helping to support this channel. I really do appreciate it. I'd also appreciate it if you would leave a like and consider subscribing to the channel if you're not already a subscriber. Now, there are other ways that you can help me out via my Patreon page or through PayPal donations. The details of how to do that are in the video description down below, or you can just use the super thanks button underneath the video that you're watching now. Not essential, but it is appreciated. I am of course going to be back on Friday, so until then, please ride safely, and I'll see you soon.